Victoria Harrington, 42 years old, fortune of $800 million, had never personally opened her front door. That rainy November evening, the doorbell rang during her gala dinner with Swiss investors. Annoyed, she opened it to find herself facing a mud-covered man holding a sleeping 3-year-old girl in his arms. William had lost everything: house, job, wife dead from cancer, and now he only had this child to feed. Victoria was about to slam the door in his face when she saw something in little Rose's eyes that broke something inside her. What happened in the following days transformed the coldest woman in London into the person she never thought she could become. Victoria Harrington's Georgian mansion in Kensington dominated London like a fortress of Cotswold stone and Georgian glass. That November evening, rain hammered against the sash windows whilst she dined with 3 Swiss investors in the oak-panelled dining room. The bespoke huntsman suit worth £5,000 emphasized her commanding presence. Auburn hair swept into a perfect chignon, pearl-lacquered nails that caught the light from the antique crystal chandelier. At 42, Victoria had built her property empire from the ruins of her father's collapsed shipping company. She owned half of London. Victorian terraces converted to luxury flats, Georgian squares transformed into exclusive developments, modern towers piercing the skyline. Money was her religion, success her only companion. The brass doorbell chimed at 9:20, shattering the refined atmosphere of the evening. Victoria raised her perfectly arched eyebrows. Nobody dared disturb her during business meetings. Mrs. Davies, the housekeeper, had departed at 8. The gardeners never worked after sunset. The porter at the gate would never permit unauthorized entry. The chiming persisted, growing more insistent. The Swiss gentleman regarded her with curiosity, whilst she rose from the mahogany table, every movement radiating irritation. She proceeded towards the entrance hall, her patent leather shoes echoing against the marble floor. She opened the heavy oak door, and time ceased. Before her stood a gentleman of approximately 35 years, thoroughly soaked by the driving rain. Sandy hair plastered to his forehead, a scruffy beard framing a face gaunt with exhaustion and desperation. Clothing that had once been respectable was now reduced to sodden rags, stained with mud and heaven's downpour. But what struck Victoria like a physical blow was the small girl the man cradled against his chest. She appeared 3 years old, possibly 4. She slumbered against her father's chest, wrapped in a threadbare pink blanket, now tattered and grimy. Golden ringlets framed a cherubic face. Yet Victoria immediately noticed how painfully thin she was, how hollow her cheeks, how pale her little lips. The man gazed at her with eyes that pleaded for mercy. He introduced himself as William Fletcher, his voice trembling as he recounted losing everything. The house repossessed by the building society, employment vanished, wife deceased from breast cancer 6 months prior. The child in his arms was Rose, his daughter, and they hadn't eaten for 2 days. Victoria assessed him from head to toe with the instinctive disdain she reserved for the impoverished. A beggar at her doorstep during a £50 million business dinner? This fellow's audacity was quite beyond the pale. William lowered his gaze and made the most degrading request of his existence. He could tend the gardens, perform any labor, in exchange for a bowl of broth for his daughter. Not for himself, only for her. Victoria was already grasping the door handle to slam it shut when the little girl opened her eyes. 2 sapphire orbs that regarded her with a purity that pierced through her very soul. Rose smiled weakly and whispered 4 words that shattered something within Victoria. "Hello, lovely lady." The millionaire felt a stabbing pain in her chest, an emotion she had buried 20 years earlier. The little girl reminded her of someone she had desperately tried to forget. Her sister Rose, who perished at age 4 in a motorway accident. The loss that had transformed her parents into emotional statues and herself into a calculating machine. She closed the door without uttering a word, abandoning father and daughter to the pelting rain. She returned to the dining room affecting normalcy, but her hands trembled as she poured vintage port into cut crystal glasses. The Swiss gentlemen failed to notice her distress, continuing their discourse on investments and returns. Yet every passing second, Victoria saw those azure eyes, heard that innocent little voice. After 10 minutes of torment, she excused herself once more and returned to the entrance, her heart pounding like thunder. William remained there, the little girl still in his arms, both shivering from the bitter cold. The downpour had intensified, and Rose had begun coughing weakly. Victoria opened the door and spoke a single word that altered everything. "Come." The kitchen of Victoria's mansion was a testament to British craftsmanship. Solid oak cupboards, traditional Aga cooker, pristine surfaces gleaming with methodical care. William settled at the scrubbed pine table, whilst cradling Rose, both still astounded to find themselves warm and secure. Victoria opened the larder stocked with Harrod's delicacies, Perigord truffles, vintage champagne, beluga caviar. Yet, ultimately, her hands selected the humblest ingredients: King Edward potatoes, garden leeks, proper chicken stock, fresh double cream. As the copper kettle heated, she observed father and daughter through the reflection in the butler's pantry mirror. William murmured tenderly into Rose's ear, who managed a faint smile despite her weariness. The gentleman bore every appearance of someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. Dark circles beneath his eyes, hands that trembled slightly, the bearing of one carrying an impossible burden. Victoria served 2 bowls of steaming leek and potato soup in her finest spode china. Rose ate with a desperation that broke one's heart, yet remained perfectly mannered, saying "thank you" after each spoonful with a politeness that no wealthy guest had ever displayed in the mansion. William consumed very little, discreetly encouraging most of his portion toward his daughter's bowl. Observing them sup, Victoria heard William recount their circumstances. He had been a successful architect with chambers in Bloomsbury. His wife Eleanor taught at a church school in Hampstead. They lived contentedly in a garden flat overlooking Hampstead Heath, until fate arrived in the form of aggressive carcinoma. 2 years of devastating treatment, chemotherapy that had reduced Eleanor to a shadow of herself, hopes that bloomed and withered daily. William had liquidated everything to fund private consultants, shuttered his practice to remain constantly by his wife's side, mortgaged their home and depleted every saving. Upon Eleanor's passing, William and Rose found themselves penniless, their home seized, debts multiplying like a malignant growth. For 3 months they had sheltered in a battered Ford estate, their final possession. William sought employment daily, yet without fixed address, proper references, or respectable appearance. No establishment would consider hiring a gentleman who reeked of desperation. Victoria listened in silence, wrestling with emotions she had interred so deeply she had forgotten their existence. She observed Rose, who had finished her soup, and now traced patterns with her damp finger upon the pine table, creating invisible drawings only she could perceive. The little girl raised her eyes to Victoria and explained she was drawing Mummy, who now resided in heaven, but watched over them always. William had told her that when it rained, those were Mummy's tears of joy, seeing them safe. Those words struck Victoria like an avalanche. She sprang from her Windsor chair and fled the kitchen, claiming she must attend to her Swiss guests. In the marble hallway, she pressed against the cold stone wall and wept for the first time in 20 years. She wept for her lost sister, for parents who never embraced her again after that tragedy, for decades spent erecting barriers around her heart rather than bridges to others. When she returned to the kitchen 5 minutes hence, William was helping Rose back into her sodden coat, preparing to depart. He thanked Victoria with a dignity that moved her profoundly. They would never forget her Christian kindness. Victoria inquired where they would go. William replied there was a railway arch near Euston, where they might shelter. Hardly the Claridges, but at least dry. Victoria regarded Rose, who smiled at her with that boundless trust unique to children, and made the most extraordinary decision of her life. She invited them to remain for the night. Victoria escorted William and Rose to the guest suite on the first floor, chambers that hadn't been occupied for a decade. The room exceeded their former flat in size. A four-poster bed dressed in Irish linen, private bathroom fitted with Carrara marble, bay windows overlooking London's twinkling skyline like earthbound constellations. Rose explored the room with wonder-struck eyes, touching everything with the reverence of one in a cathedral. Every surface, every fabric, every detail represented magical discovery. William appeared mortified by Victoria's excessive generosity, but she silenced his protests with a look. Whilst William bathed Rose in the marble tub, Victoria returned to her Swiss associates. She expeditiously concluded the £50 million agreement, executing documents that would previously have thrilled her. Yet that evening, for the first time in 2 decades of commerce, she felt utterly hollow. Her thoughts continually drifted upstairs to that little girl slumbering in the guest chambers. After the Swiss departed with lighter wallets, and her accounts correspondingly heavier, Victoria ascended to check on her guests. She discovered Rose sleeping peacefully in the vast bed, appearing doll-like against the expanse of white linen. William occupied a Regency armchair, maintaining vigil over his daughter's rest with angelic devotion. William confessed his inability to sleep without hearing Rose breathe. Since Eleanor's death, he lived in perpetual terror that his daughter might also vanish, dissolving like a dream upon waking. Victoria observed him with entirely fresh perspective. This gentleman had lost everything society deemed valuable: wealth, property, social standing, security. Yet he retained the world's most precious treasure: pure, unconditional love for his child. She possessed everything he had forfeited, yet had never loved anyone with such intensity. In that moment of shared silence, Victoria pledged that tomorrow she would assist them in securing employment and accommodation. William regarded her with amazement.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
Unable to comprehend why a stranger would extend such extraordinary kindness, Victoria gazed upon sleeping Rose and whispered the truth she had never confessed. She, too, had once possessed a sister named Rose, whose death had extinguished every light in the Harrington family's heart. The following morning, Victoria awoke at 6 as customary, yet something fundamental had shifted. From below arose warm voices, William singing Jerusalem to Rose, whilst preparing breakfast with provisions discovered in the pantry. Descending to the kitchen, she encountered a scene absent for 20 years. A proper family sharing breakfast. William had located crumpets and Oxford marmalade, Rose giggling at her father's gentle jest. The atmosphere was so natural, so vibrant with life, that Victoria paused unobserved in the doorway, absorbing this happiness like one dying of thirst. Upon entering, Rose rushed to embrace her legs with childlike spontaneity. William had christened her the guardian angel who had rescued them from the streets. During breakfast, Victoria studied William with the calculating eye of a seasoned entrepreneur. Despite his shabby attire and unkempt appearance, he radiated keen intelligence, solid breeding, the hands of one who understood beauty's creation. The architectural portfolios he perpetually carried in a worn leather satchel were brilliant. Innovative designs, sustainable solutions, a sensitivity for human-scale spaces she had never witnessed in her highly paid consultants. Victoria presented an offer that transformed everything. She was developing a £200 million residential estate in Greenwich. Her principal architect was technically competent but utterly soulless. She required William to oversee the entire project, transforming it from mere property speculation into somewhere families might genuinely flourish. The position included chambers on the 20th floor of Harrington House, personal secretary, company motor car, and salary of £8,000 monthly, triple William's pre-illness earnings. Yet Victoria added a condition that rendered William speechless. She insisted Rose accompany him daily to the office. She would establish a special area for the child, furnished with toys, books, and every necessity. William couldn't fathom why a millionaire would extend such extraordinary consideration to two strangers. Victoria gazed through the Georgian windows at the buildings she had erected, the streets she owned, the empire she had constructed brick by brick. The truth was devastatingly simple. She had spent 20 years constructing edifices rather than relationships. William and Rose were teaching her the genuine meaning of wealth. 3 months later, Harrington House had become utterly transformed. On the 20th floor, William's office had become the building's most cheerful space. Rose possessed her own corner featuring a miniature Wendy house, library stocked with classic children's literature, and small table where she sketched for hours. Each afternoon at 4 o'clock, she conducted rounds of the offices, distributing her artistic creations to employees who had learned to anticipate this moment as the day's highlight. Victoria, who for 20 years had intimidated everyone with ruthless efficiency, now smiled upon hearing Rose's melodious laughter echoing through the Georgian corridors. The little girl had dubbed her Auntie Victoria, and she had never presumed to correct this delightful error. William had completely revolutionized the Greenwich development. What was intended as another luxury residential scheme had evolved into a genuine community. Roof gardens where children might play, communal spaces fostering neighborly interaction, intimate squares where elderly residents could rest in tranquility. Victoria recognized she was collaborating with the finest architect of her career, someone who designed with heart as much as mind. One spring afternoon, Rose entered Victoria's office bearing one of her drawings. It depicted a family rendered in colored pencils, a tall father with beard, a little girl with golden curls, and an elegant lady, all positioned before an enormous house surrounded by blooming flowers. Rose explained proudly that it represented all three of them, herself, Papa William, and Auntie Victoria, the most beautiful family in all of London. Victoria studied that drawing and wept for the third time in 3 months. Yet these weren't tears of past anguish, but tears of joy for a future she had never dared imagine. That evening she invited William and Rose to dine at her mansion. Not a business engagement, not formal entertaining, but genuine family dinner. She personally prepared roast beef with Yorkshire pudding and treacle tart, dishes she hadn't cooked since her mother's death, a decade prior. Whilst Rose played in the garden amongst roses Victoria had planted commemorating her sister, William and Victoria sat upon the terrace overlooking London's evening illumination like a vast Christmas display. William confessed what he missed most about Eleanor, being unable to share with her the joy of watching Rose mature, growing increasingly beautiful and intelligent, discovering the world with that wonder unique to childhood. Victoria met his gaze and spoke something she had never believed possible. Perhaps Rose wasn't solely observed from heaven. Perhaps someone earthbound was also watching her flourish with equal devotion. William understood that what was developing between himself and Victoria transcended mere gratitude for assistance received. It was something profound, something neither had sought, yet both had discovered unconsciously. Rose scampered toward them with soil-stained hands and the most radiant smile imaginable. She posed an important question. Tomorrow was her 4th birthday. Would Auntie Victoria organize a party? Victoria regarded this little girl, who had transformed her existence from emotional wasteland into flourishing garden, and smiled with happiness she hadn't experienced for 20 years. She would arrange the most splendid celebration in all of London. On Rose's 4th birthday, Victoria transformed the mansion's garden into a wonderland befitting royalty. Pink and gold balloons floated amongst flowering cherry boughs. A bouncy castle dominated the manicured lawn. Professional entertainers amused 30 children from across London. Centerpiece was a 3-tier cake that might have emerged from Lewis Carroll's imagination. Yet the true magic wasn't in 100,000-pound decorations or celebrity performers. It was witnessing Victoria laughing unrestrainedly whilst racing with children, soiling her 5,000-pound silk frock rolling upon grass, completely forgetting she was London's wealthiest and most formidable woman. William observed her, enchanted. This was genuine Victoria, whom she had concealed 20 years behind masks of ice and armor of ambition. During festivities, Rose approached Victoria with that serious demeanor children adopt when posing momentous questions. She wished to know why Auntie Victoria possessed no children of her own, why she dwelt alone in such an enormous house. The inquiry struck Victoria like lightning from clear skies. All present instinctively fell silent, sensing something significant was imminent. Other children's parents, Victoria's employees who had been invited, William holding his breath in anticipation. Victoria knelt to Rose's level and spoke the most beautiful truth of her existence. She hadn't borne children because she had been waiting for Rose, waiting to encounter the most extraordinary little girl in the world. Rose embraced her with all her small strength and whispered the question that changed everything. Did this mean Victoria was now her heart mummy? Victoria regarded William, whose eyes glistened with emotion. Then she observed all the guests, people who for years had feared and respected her solely for her power, now witnessing her happy and human for the first time. She said yes, she had become Rose's heart mummy. When festivities concluded and final guests departed bearing memories of a magical afternoon, William, Victoria, and Rose sat in the garden beneath star-embroidered heavens. Rose slumbered in Victoria's arms, who rocked her gently whilst humming a lullaby her mother had sung decades ago. William regarded the woman who had rescued his family and summoned courage to speak truth. He was falling in love with her. He hadn't sought love. It wasn't in his plans as a desperate single father. Yet the heart follows no logic. Victoria silenced him with the first kiss she had ever given for love rather than advantage. The first kiss emanating from heart rather than calculation. She was falling in love with both, with William and Rose, with the family she hadn't known she desired. 6 months later, in an intimate ceremony amongst the garden roses Victoria had planted commemorating her sister, William and Victoria wed. Rose served as the proudest bridesmaid in England, wearing pink silk that rendered her a miniature princess. During the exchange of rings, Victoria regarded the gentleman who had rescued her from profound loneliness, and the little girl who had taught her that love isn't purchased with wealth, but won with the heart. The woman who once measured everything in pounds sterling had discovered that true riches weren't calculated in assets and portfolios, but in smiles shared over breakfast, embraces before sleep. "I love you," whispered in night's darkness. Victoria Harrington had opened her door to 2 strangers beneath November rain, and they had opened her heart to a life she hadn't known she craved. She had gained a family and rediscovered her finest qualities. That 4-year-old girl who had perished with her sister Rose, and now was reborn daily in the new Rose's eyes. Each evening, whilst tucking the little girl into the bedroom she had transformed into a fairy tale realm, Rose spoke the same words. "Thank you for saving us, Mummy Victoria." Yet Victoria knew the truth that warmed her heart each night. They had been the ones to save her. If this story has demonstrated that love surpasses any fortune, strike that like with all your might. Share to prove that family is chosen, not inherited. Tell us in the comments, do you believe Victoria made the proper decision? Would you have opened that door? Which moment affected you most profoundly? Subscribe now for more extraordinary tales of unexpected love, families who choose one another, and proof that miracles occur when we open our hearts.